My name is Kiyazi. I am a ranger with the Forestry Service, stationed near the Mogollon Rim in Arizona. For those who don't know the Rim, it's a massive limestone and sandstone escarpment that cuts across the heart of the state. It's a place of incredible beauty, where the ponderosa pines stand like ancient soldiers guarding the edge of the world. But it's also a place of deep, suffocating shadows. My grandmother, a woman who carried the wisdom of the DNA in every wrinkle of her face, used to tell me that the Rim wasn't just a geographical feature. She called it a seam, a place where the fabric of our world was stitched loosely to something much older and much darker. She warned me never to go near the shadow cave after the sun had touched the horizon. The old ones, she would say in a voice like dry leaves, they don't like to be disturbed while they are breathing. I grew up, went to college, and became a ranger. I traded her stories for a badge, a radio, and a Glock 19. I thought science and GPS could map out every ghost in the woods. I was wrong. It was a Thursday in late September. The air was crisp, smelling of damp earth and drying pine needles. I received a call from dispatch around 4:30 p.m. A group of experienced hikers had reported one of their party missing near the Shadow Cave trailhead. His name was Leo. He wasn't a novice. He knew these woods. But in the Mogollon Rim, experience doesn't mean anything when the shadows start to stretch. I arrived at the trailhead just as the sky was turning a bruised purple. The other hikers were frantic. They told me Leo had wandered off the path to photograph a strange rock formation and simply vanished. They said the woods had gone silent for a moment, not a bird, not a cricket, not even the wind. And when the sound returned, Leo was gone. I told them to stay by their vehicles and wait for the search and rescue team. But I knew the protocol. Every minute counted. I grabbed my pack, checked my flashlight, and stepped onto the trail. The first mile was normal. The sound of my boots on the dry needles was the only thing breaking the silence. But as I drew closer to the area known as Shadow Cave, the atmosphere shifted. The temperature didn't just drop. It felt like the heat was being sucked out of my skin by an invisible vacuum. The light didn't just fade. It seemed to be swallowed by the trees themselves. I noticed the birds first, or rather, the lack of them. In Arizona, the woods are never truly quiet. There's always the chatter of scrub jays or the rustle of a squirrel. But here, the forest was a tomb. The air felt thick, heavy, like I was walking underwater. I reached the limestone shelf that overlooks the entrance to Shadow Cave. The cave isn't huge, but it has a reputation for being hungry. I shined my light toward the entrance, and that's when I saw Leo's camera. It was sitting on a flat rock, perfectly positioned as if he were taking a timed photo of the cave mouth. I picked it up. The screen was still on. I scrolled back to the last photo taken. It was a shot of the cave entrance, but in the center of the dark opening, there was a shape. It wasn't a man. It was a tall, thin silhouette, almost blending into the rock, with eyes that caught the camera's flash in a way that no human eye ever could. They didn't reflect white or red. They reflected a deep, pulsing violet. My hand shook as I tucked the camera into my vest. "Leo?" I called out. My voice felt small, muffled by the heavy air. From the depths of the cave, a sound drifted out. It wasn't a scream. It was a whistle. A long, low, three-note whistle that my grandmother used to use to call me home for dinner. I felt a chill wash over me that had nothing to do with the mountain air. My grandmother had been dead for 10 years. The sound of that whistle, my grandmother's whistle, hung in the air long after it had faded. It felt wrong, like a piece of my childhood had been stolen and twisted into something sharp. I stood on that limestone ledge for what felt like an eternity, my flashlight beam trembling against the mouth of the cave. Every instinct I had, every drop of Danae blood in my veins, told me to turn around, to run until I reached the main road and never look back. But I was a ranger, and Leo was still down there. I adjusted the strap of my pack and stepped off the ledge, descending the rocky slope toward the entrance. The smell hit me as soon as I crossed the threshold. It wasn't the typical damp, earthy scent of a cave. It was something metallic, like the taste of a copper penny mixed with the faint, cloying odor of crushed wildflowers that had been left to rot in a jar. Leo? This is Ranger Yazi. Can you hear me? My voice echoed this time, but the echoes sounded distorted, as if the cave walls were repeating my words back to me with a slight mocking delay. Yazi, hear me. I moved deeper into the first chamber. The limestone walls were damp, glistening under my LED light like the interior of a throat. I kept my eyes on the floor, looking for any sign of a struggle or a trail. That's when I saw the first wrong element. Arranged in a perfect circle in the center of the chamber were small stacks of stones cairns, but they weren't the kind hikers use to mark a trail. These were balanced with impossible precision, some of them 5 feet high, made of stones so thin they should have collapsed under their own weight. And at the top of each stack sat a single dried pine needle pointing toward the back of the cave. I didn't touch them. I walked around the circle, my skin crawling. The silence was so heavy now that I could hear the internal hum of my own nervous system. As I pushed further into the secondary tunnel, the path narrowed. The ceiling dipped, forcing me to hunch over. The walls here were different, covered in a dark, soot-like substance that felt oily to the touch. I shined my light along the walls and saw markings. They weren't petroglyphs I recognized from any tribe. They were long, jagged scratches deep in the rock, as if something with claws of diamond had been trying to climb out. Help me! The whisper was so faint I almost missed it. It didn't come from ahead of me. It sounded like it was coming from the rock itself, right next to my ear. I spun around, my light scanning the narrow tunnel. Nothing. Just the oily black stone. My heart was thudding so hard in my chest, I thought it would bruise my ribs. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my hands. Focus, Kia. Focus on the job. I pushed through a tight squeeze and emerged into a massive gallery. This was the shadow cave people talked about. It was huge, the ceiling lost in the darkness above. My flashlight could only cut through a fraction of the void. In the center of the gallery, I found Leo. He was sitting on a flat stone, his back to me. He wasn't moving. His head was bowed, and he was humming. It was the same low, 3-note melody I had heard earlier. Leo? Thank God. It's okay. I'm here to get you out. I started toward him, but my boots suddenly felt heavy, as if the floor was becoming magnetic. Leo didn't turn around. He didn't even flinch at the sound of my voice. Leo, we have to go. The SAR team is on the way, but we need to move now. I reached out to touch his shoulder, but just before my fingers made contact, he spoke. His voice was hollow, devoid of any emotion, like he was reading from a script he didn't understand. The old ones. They said you'd come, Kia. They remembered the whistle. He turned his head, then slowly, with a series of wet, clicking sounds in his neck. His face was pale, almost translucent in the white light of my torch. But it was his eyes that stopped my breath. They weren't brown anymore. The pupils had stretched into long vertical slits, and the iris was a pulsing, bruised violet. And then I realized why he hadn't stood up. Below his waist, Leo's legs weren't tucked under him. They were gone. In their place, a thick, dark mass of something that looked like obsidian roots was growing out of his hips, anchoring him deep into the floor of the cave. He wasn't sitting on the stone. He was becoming part of it. "They're hungry, Kia," Leo whispered, a single violet tear rolling down his cheek. "And they liked the way you tasted in your dreams." The air in the gallery suddenly shifted. The heavy silence was replaced by a sound that made my hair stand on end. It was the sound of thousands of tiny stone-hard claws scuttling along the ceiling above us. I looked up, and for a second, I forgot how to breathe. The ceiling of the gallery wasn't just rock. It was alive. In the harsh, white glare of my flashlight, I saw hundreds, maybe thousands of them. They looked like porcelain dolls that had been shattered and glued back together with dark, oily clay. Their limbs were long, spindly, and jointed in ways that defied human anatomy, clicking and snapping as they moved. They didn't have eyes, just smooth, pale surfaces where faces should have been, reflecting my light in a dull, sickening glow. They were the old ones, and they were watching me with their skin. "Kia, don't look away," Leo's voice rasping behind me. "They don't like it when you look away. It makes them feel forgotten." I backed away, my boots scraping against the cold limestone. My hand went to my holster, my fingers brushing against the cold steel of my Glock, but I didn't draw it. Deep down, I knew that Lead wouldn't do anything against things that had been carved out of the mountain's soul long before man learned to walk upright. One of the creatures descended from the ceiling, its movements fluid yet jerky, like a marionette being pulled by invisible, frantic hands. It landed 5 feet in front of me with a sound like a heavy, wet bag hitting the floor. Up close, the smell of rotting wildflowers was suffocating. It tilted its head, mimicking the exact movement I had made seconds before. It opened its mouth, a jagged horizontal slit that tore across the smooth white skin of its face. From that dark void came a sound that broke my heart. "Kia, come home, baby. Dinner's getting cold." It was my grandmother's voice. Not a mimicry, not a recording, but her exact tone, her exact inflection. The creature's throat vibrated with the sound, but its face remained a blank porcelain mask. "Stop it," I whispered, my voice trembling. "You're not her. You're nothing." The creature clicked. It reached out a long, pale finger, a finger that ended in a sharp obsidian claw and pointed at Leo. Leo was no longer humming. He was sinking. The dark obsidian roots were crawling up his chest, turning his skin into the same oily black stone as the cave walls. He wasn't screaming. He looked peaceful. That was the most terrifying part. He had accepted the mountain's embrace. He was the first course, the creature whispered, still using my grandmother's voice. But you are the guardian. You carry the blood of the people who knew our names. We don't want to eat you, Kia. We want you to remember us. The scuttling sound on the ceiling grew louder. The other creatures were descending now, surrounding me in a circle of pale, twitching limbs. The air in the gallery grew thick with the smell of stagnant water and old earth. My flashlight started to flicker. The battery, which should have lasted for hours, was dying. The shadows at the edges of the room began to stretch, leaning toward me like they were hungry for my warmth. "Remember what?" I shouted, my back hitting a cold, damp pillar of rock. The creature stepped closer. It reached out and touched the badge on my chest. Its claw left a deep, jagged scratch in the metal. "Remember the bargain," it hissed. "A life for the forest. A soul for the silence. Your ancestors kept the rim quiet. They gave us the lost ones, the wanderers, the ones who didn't respect the trees. In return, we let your people live. But now, the wanderers are everywhere. They bring their lights, their machines, their noise. They have forgotten the old ones." The creature leaned in, its face inches from mine. I could see the fine cracks in its porcelain skin, the way its body seemed to be made of shifting tectonic plates. "You will stay, Kia. You will be the new anchor. You will sit where Leo sits, and you will hum the songs that keep the mountain from waking up. If you don't, if you leave, the rim will not just breathe. It will scream, and the scream will tear your world apart." I looked at Leo. He was almost gone now. Only his face remained human, staring at me with those pulsing violet eyes. I looked at the creatures, their blank faces waiting for my answer. My flashlight gave one final, desperate pulse and died. Total darkness swallowed the gallery. But I wasn't blind. In the void, I could see the violet glow of their eyes, not in front of me, but inside my own mind. They were showing me the rim. They were showing me the thousands of hikers, the families in their cabins, the children playing near the trailheads. And then they showed me what would happen if the mountains screamed. I felt the cold, oily roots start to brush against my ankles. The darkness wasn't just an absence of light, it was a physical weight, pressing against my eyeballs and filling my lungs with the scent of cold, ancient stone. The roots, those obsidian, oily tendrils, began to coil around my boots. I could feel them through the leather, cold as a dead man's grip, pulsing with a slow, rhythmic heartbeat that matched the vibration of the cave itself. "The bargain, Kia," the voice of my grandmother whispered, coming from every direction at once. "It is a small price for the safety of the many. One soul to keep the mountains silent. One life to guard the seam." I felt my knees buckle. The fatigue I had been fighting since I stepped onto the trail finally caught up to me. But it wasn't just physical. It was a spiritual exhaustion, a siren song beckoning me to just sit down, to let the roots take hold, and to stop fighting the inevitable. I looked toward the spot where Leo had been. He was gone now. In his place was a jagged pillar of black stone that pulsed with a faint violet internal light. He wasn't dead, not in the way we understand it. He had been transformed into a living battery for the mountain's hunger. But as the roots crawled up to my shins, something snapped inside me. It wasn't my training as a ranger, and it wasn't the Glock on my hip. It was a memory, a real one. Not the twisted version the old ones were using. I remembered my grandmother sitting on her porch, looking out at the rim, and she wasn't just talking about fear. She was talking about respect. "The old ones don't want us to fear them, Kia," she had said one night, the smoke from her pipe curling into the air. "They want us to acknowledge them. They are the land, and the land does not want to be served by slaves." It wants to be walked by people who know where the boundaries are. I reached into the pocket of my vest, and my fingers brushed against the camera I had taken from the ledge, Leo's camera. I pulled it out. My flashlight was dead, but the camera still had a sliver of battery life. I didn't turn on the screen. Instead, I fumbled for the flash button. I stood up, the roots snapping and groaning as I forced my legs to move. "I am not your anchor," I shouted into the void. "I am the ranger of this rim. I am the one who tells the wanderers where they can and cannot go. I acknowledge you, but I do not serve you." I pressed the shutter button. Flash. For a microsecond, the gallery was flooded with an artificial, blinding white light. In that split second, I saw them. They weren't just surrounding me. They were cowering. The old ones, the porcelain-skinned mimics, screeched, a sound like grinding tectonic plates. They covered their smooth, featureless faces with their spindly limbs, their bodies smoking where the flash had touched them. They didn't hate the light because it hurt them. They hated it because it revealed them. It stripped away the mystery they used to paralyze their prey. Flash. I fired the flash again, moving toward the narrow tunnel I had come through. Each burst of light was a weapon, carving a path through the sea of violet eyes. I felt the roots around my legs wither and retreat, hissing as they shrank back into the cracks in the floor. I ran. I didn't care about the low ceiling or the sharp rocks. I ran through the narrow squeeze, my breath coming in ragged, burning gasps. Behind me, the gallery erupted into a cacophony of whistles, hundreds of them, all mimicking my grandmother, all calling me back, all crying out in a language of grief and fury. I reached the first chamber, the circle of stone cairns. I didn't walk around them this time. I kicked through them, shattering the delicate balance, sending the stones clattering across the oily floor. The whistling stopped instantly. The cave went silent, a silence so sudden it made my ears ring. I scrambled up the limestone ledge and burst out of the cave mouth, just as the first gray light of dawn began to bleed over the Mogollon Rim. I didn't stop running until I reached my truck. I didn't look back until I was miles down the forest road, the sun finally cresting the horizon and turning the pines into gold. When the search and rescue team arrived later that morning, I told them I found the camera, but no sign of Leo. I told them the cave was unstable, that the limestone was shifting, and that it was too dangerous to enter without specialized equipment. I made sure they officially closed the Shadow Cave trailhead. Permanently. I still have Leo's camera. I never turned it on again. I keep it in a locked box in my basement away from the light. Because sometimes, late at night, when the wind blows from the north and the rim is shrouded in clouds, I can hear a faint electronic beep coming from that box, like a shutter clicking. And on the nights when it's especially quiet, I find myself humming a 3-note melody I haven't heard since I was a child. I try to stop, but the song isn't in my head. It's in my bones. I am still a ranger. I still patrol the rim. But I no longer carry just a radio and a gun. I carry a pocket full of cornmeal and a heart full of heavy, silent respect. Because I know that beneath the beauty of the pines, the mountain is still breathing, and it's still waiting for someone to remind it that it hasn't been forgotten. My name is Elias. I've spent the better part of a decade working as a field technician for the Bureau of Land Management, and if there's one thing the desert teaches you, it's that silence has layers. In the city, silence is just a lack of noise. But out here, in the sun-scorched throat of Canyon Diablo, Arizona, silence is a living thing. It's heavy, it's ancient, and it's always watching. Canyon Diablo isn't like the Grand Canyon. It doesn't have the grand sweeping vistas that tourists flock to for photos. It's a jagged, ugly cut in the earth, a limestone scar that looks like it was hacked out by a giant rusted blade. The rocks are a bruised, oxidized red, and the wind that blows through the gaps doesn't just whistle, it moans. The local legends say the canyon was a place where the old gods used to discard the things they were ashamed of creating. After what I saw 3 months ago, I'm starting to think those legends were too optimistic. It was a Tuesday in mid-July, the kind of day where the heat is a physical enemy. The thermometer on my truck's dash had peaked at 114 degrees before the sensor simply gave up. My assignment was straightforward, or so I thought. Find a missing archaeology student named Marcus. He had been out near the northern rim of the canyon documenting undocumented petroglyphs and had missed his check-in by 48 hours. I arrived at the trailhead, which was really just a wide spot in the gravel road, around 6 p.m. The sun was beginning to dip, casting shadows that looked like long skeletal fingers reaching across the canyon floor. I grabbed my pack, checked my water, and made sure my radio was fully charged. Dispatch, this is Elias. I'm at the northern entry point, commencing search for Marcus Thorne. I'll check in every hour, I said into the radio. Copy that, Elias. Be advised, there's a localized storm cell moving in from the west. Keep an eye on the flash flood markers. The voice on the other end crackled. I looked at the sky. It was a clear, vibrating blue. There wasn't a cloud in sight. I chalked it up to a glitch in their radar and started the descent. The path into the Diablo cut is steep and treacherous. The limestone is brittle, constantly crumbling under your boots, sending small avalanches of red dust into the void below. As I moved deeper, the temperature didn't just drop as the sun vanished, it plummeted. The desert has a way of stealing your warmth the moment you lose sight of the sun. By 9 p.m., I was at the bottom. My headlamp cut a lonely white circle into the absolute blackness of the canyon floor. That's when the silence changed. Usually, you can hear the scuttle of a lizard or the distant hum of a highway. But here, the air felt thick, like I was walking through invisible curtains of wool. I reached Marcus's last known coordinates. His tent was there, pitched in the lee of a massive overhanging rock. It was collapsed, not by the wind, but as if something heavy had sat on it. I shined my light inside. His sleeping bag was still there, unrolled and empty. His boots were tucked neatly in the corner. That was the first red flag. No one in their right mind wanders the Diablo floor at night without boots. I stepped out of the tent and panned my light across the canyon wall. The limestone was covered in carvings, petroglyphs, that shouldn't have been there. They weren't the standard depictions of hunters or bighorn sheep. They were spirals, thousands of them, etched so deep into the rock that they looked like open wounds. And in the center of the spirals was a figure, a tall, spindly shape with too many joints in its arms, reaching upward toward a hole in the sky. Marcus? I called out. The echo didn't come back to me. It didn't bounce off the walls. It just disappeared. That's when I heard the first click. Click, clack, click. It was the sound of something hard hitting the limestone. It wasn't a rock falling. It was rhythmic. It was walking. And it was coming from the shadows of a narrow cave entrance just 20 yards to my left. I stood frozen, the beam of my headlamp trembling slightly as it cut through the darkness toward the cave entrance. The clicking sound stopped. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was heavy, like the air had been replaced by something thicker, something that carried a faint metallic taste. Marcus? I tried again, my voice barely a whisper. This time there was a response. It wasn't a word. It was a groan, a low, grinding sound like two massive slabs of limestone being rubbed together. It came from deep within the narrow slit in the canyon wall. I knew I should wait for the search and rescue team. I knew the protocol. But in the desert, at night, waiting can be a death sentence. If Marcus was in there, injured and without boots, the cold would take him before the sun rose. I adjusted my pack and squeezed into the opening. The walls were tight, the jagged limestone catching on my tactical vest, whispering against the fabric. As I pushed through the first 20 feet, the temperature dropped another 10 degrees. The air smelled of ancient dust and something else, something sweet and sickly, like sun-bleached bone. My light hit the floor of the tunnel. There, imprinted in the fine red dust, were Marcus's footprints. But they weren't the footprints of a man walking. They were deep, jagged ruts, as if he had been dragged. And next to them, there were no handprints. Instead, there were small, circular indentations spaced perfectly apart. The clicks. Help. Me. The voice was hollow. It didn't sound like Marcus. It sounded like a recording of Marcus being played through a broken speaker. It was coming from a chamber just ahead, where the tunnel opened up into a massive bell-shaped cavern. I burst into the chamber, my light panner frantically. The walls here were different. They weren't just carved. They were polished until they shone like dark glass. Thousands of those spirals I had seen outside covered every inch of the ceiling, swirling toward a central point directly above a stone pedestal in the middle of the room. And there was Marcus. He was slumped against the pedestal, his skin the color of ash. He was alive, but his eyes were fixed on the ceiling, his pupils so dilated they looked like twin pools of ink. He was shivering, a rhythmic, mechanical tremor that made his teeth rattle. "Marcus, don't move, I've got you," I said, rushing toward him. I reached out to grab his arm, but as my hand touched his skin, I recoiled. He wasn't cold. He was vibrating. A low-frequency hum was pulsing through his body, so strong it made my own fingernails ache. "Elias," Marcus rasped, his eyes never leaving the ceiling. "It's not a cave. It's a throat. We're in its throat." "Don't talk. Just focus on me," I said, pulling a thermal blanket from my pack. But as I draped it over him, the clicking sound returned. This time, it wasn't coming from the tunnel. It was coming from above. I tilted my head back, my light following the curve of the polished walls up to the center of the spirals. High above us, tucked into a crevice that looked like a jagged wound in the rock, was the guard. It didn't look like a beast. It looked like a sculpture made of obsidian and dried sinew. It was long, impossibly long, with limbs that folded back on themselves like the legs of a praying mantis. It had no face, only a smooth, black surface that reflected my headlamp back at me with a distorted, oily sheen. Its fingers, if you could call them that, were tipped with the same hard, circular points that had made the clicking sound in the dust. It wasn't moving. It was just hanging there, suspended by its claws, watching us with its entire presence. Then, the humming in Marcus's body stopped. The silence that followed was so absolute, it felt like a physical blow. The guard shifted. It didn't fall. It descended, its limbs unfolding in a series of wet, snapping sounds that echoed through the chamber like gunshots. It moved with a terrifying, liquid grace, its hooves, those hard, clicking points, touching the polished floor with the delicacy of a dancer. It stood between us and the exit, a silhouette of jagged angles that seemed to absorb the light from my torch. "Dispatch, this is Elias. Do you copy? I have the subject. We are in a cavern at the northern base. We need immediate." My radio didn't static. It screamed. A high-pitched harmonic shriek erupted from the speaker, a sound so violent it made my ears bleed. I dropped the radio, the device clattering onto the stone. The guard tilted its head a sharp mechanical jerk. Then, it spoke. It didn't use a voice. It used the sound of my own radio's static, shaping the white noise into words that felt like they were being carved into the inside of my skull. "The sun is gone. Elias. The Guard of Canyon Diablo Part 3. The price of the pedestal." I stood paralyzed, the scream of the radio static still ringing in my ears. The guard didn't move toward us. It simply stood there, its obsidian limbs twitching with a rhythmic, insect-like precision. The light from my headlamp seemed to wrap around its body rather than illuminating it, as if the creature were a whole in reality itself. Marcus let out a soft, broken whimper. His hand reached out, clawing at the dust on the floor, but his eyes were still locked onto the guard. "It wants the spirals, Elias," he whispered, his voice sounding like dry parchment rubbing together. "It doesn't want us. It wants the circles to keep turning." I didn't understand what he meant until I looked at the pedestal. In the center of the chamber, the stone pillar wasn't just a rock. Now that I was closer, I could see that the top of it was a shallow basin, filled with a thick, silver liquid that looked like liquid mercury, but moved like it was alive. The liquid was swirling in a slow, clockwise direction, perfectly mimicking the thousands of spirals etched into the ceiling and walls. Every time the liquid completed a rotation, a soft, low-frequency thrum vibrated through the floor, the heartbeat I had felt earlier. The guard took a step closer. Click. Clack. It reached out one of its impossibly long arms. The fingers, those sharp, clicking points, hovered just inches above the silver basin. The creature didn't touch the liquid. Instead, it began to draw its own spiral in the air above it. As it moved, the silver liquid began to pulse with a violet light, the same color I had seen in the shadow cave. "Marcus, we have to move!" "Now!" I hissed, grabbing him under the armpits. He was dead weight. It felt like I was trying to lift a statue made of lead. His skin was becoming cold again, but it was a greasy, unnatural cold. I looked down and saw that the red dust on the floor was crawling up his legs, coating his skin in a layer of fine, crystalline sand that looked like it was growing out of his pores. The guard turned its smooth, featureless head toward me. The static from the radio on the floor suddenly changed tone. It softened, becoming a melodic, humming sound. The same commercial jingle I had heard in my head during my first night in the canyon. Elias, why do you resist the circle? The voice didn't come from the radio anymore. It came from the silver basin. The liquid was shaping itself into the likeness of a human mouth, its lips moving in perfect synchronization with the distorted electronic words. "I'm taking him out of here," I said, my voice cracking. I reached for the Glock on my hip, but my holster was empty. I looked down, confused. My belt was there, my flashlight was there, but the gun was gone. I looked back at the pedestal. There, resting at the bottom of the silver basin, was my Glock. It wasn't just sitting there, it was being dissolved. The metal was bubbling, turning into more of that shimmering silver liquid. The guard hadn't stolen it. The mountain had claimed it. The guard let out a sound, a sharp, rattling hiss like a disturbed rattlesnake. It lunged forward, not with its body, but with its shadow. The shadow of the creature stretched across the floor with impossible speed, reaching toward my feet. Where the shadow touched the stone, the limestone turned to liquid, bubbling up like a boiling tar pit. "The canyon doesn't want souls, Elias," Marcus suddenly screamed, his eyes finally snapping toward me, filled with a terrifying clarity. "It wants weight. It needs things from the world above to keep the spirals heavy. If the silver stops spinning, the floor opens. Everything opens." As if on cue, the humming from the basin faltered. The silver liquid slowed its rotation. The cavern groaned. A massive crack tore across the ceiling, shedding flakes of polished stone like black snow. The guard began to vibrate, its entire body blurring as it let out a sound of pure mechanical grief. It looked at Marcus, then at me. It realized I was heavier than the student. I had the gear, I had the heavy boots, I had the physical presence of a man who had walked these canyons for years. The creature's obsidian limbs snapped out, grabbing Marcus and tossing him toward the tunnel entrance like he was a rag doll. Marcus hit the wall and slumped down, unconscious but free from the pedestal's pull. Then the guard turned back to me. It didn't look aggressive anymore. It looked desperate. It began to gesture toward the basin, its long fingers beckoning me to step closer. "The circle must turn, Elias, or the Diablo wakes up." I backed away, but the floor behind me was no longer solid. The limestone had turned into a thick red slurry that gripped my boots like quicksand. I was being pulled toward the center, toward the basin, toward the spiral that needed to be fed. The red slurry around my boots felt like hundreds of cold, tiny hands pulling me down. The more I struggled, the faster I sank into the limestone floor. The silver liquid in the basin was barely moving now, just a sluggish, dying ripple, and with every second it slowed, the cavern groaned louder. It wasn't just the sound of rock shifting. It was the sound of something gargantuan beneath the earth turning in its sleep. The guard stood over the basin, its obsidian body trembling. It looked at me, then at the dissolving remains of my gear. It wasn't enough. My radio, my gun, Marcus's backpack, they were just appetizers. The mountain needed a heart. It needed a witness. Stay, Elias. The voice from the basin whispered, now sounding like a choir of 1,000 distorted voices. Wait. I looked at Marcus, lying crumpled near the tunnel exit. He was my responsibility. That was the routine of my job, the professional duty I had carried for 6 years. But this wasn't a landslide or a flash flood. This was an ancient debt. I reached into my utility belt one last time. My fingers found the heavy, brass-bound compass my father had given me when I first joined the BLM. It was solid, heavy, and carried the weight of 3 generations of surveyors. It was the most real thing I owned. "You want weight?" I screamed, the red slurry now up to my knees. "Take it." I didn't just drop the compass into the basin. I hurled it with every ounce of strength I had left. The brass hit the silver liquid with a sound like a cathedral bell ringing deep underwater. Bong. The reaction was instantaneous. The silver liquid didn't just spin, it erupted into a violent, glowing vortex. The violet light became so bright it burned through the darkness, illuminating every jagged crack in the ceiling. The guard let out a long, vibrating hum, a sound of satisfaction. The suction on my legs vanished. The red slurry hardened back into solid limestone in a heartbeat, nearly pinning my feet in place. I scrambled, tearing my boots free from the stone, and lunged toward Marcus. I didn't look back at the pedestal. I didn't look back at the guard. I hoisted Marcus over my shoulder, his body still humming with that faint residual vibration, and I ran. The tunnel felt miles longer than it had on the way in. The walls seemed to be breathing, the limestone expanding and contracting as if the canyon were gasping for air. Every time my boots hit the ground, I heard a faint click echoing behind me, but I didn't stop. I couldn't. When we finally collapsed onto the desert floor outside the cave, the storm the radio had warned me about had finally arrived. But there was no rain, just a dry, howling wind that carried the scent of ozone and ancient dust. I looked back at the cave entrance. It was gone. The slit in the rock had sealed itself shut, leaving nothing but a smooth red wall of limestone. There were no petroglyphs, no spirals, just the indifferent face of the Arizona desert under a starless sky. I got Marcus to the hospital in Flagstaff. The doctors said he was suffering from extreme dehydration and a strange type of vibrational trauma they couldn't explain. He recovered, but he never spoke another word. Not about the cave, not about the archaeology, not even to say thank you. He moved back east a month later, and I heard he stopped doing field work entirely. As for me, I kept my job. But I'm different now. I don't carry a compass anymore. I don't trust the North. I spend my nights in the office filing reports and looking at satellite maps. But every once in a while, when the office is quiet and the sun is setting over the rim, I hear it. I'll be sitting at my desk and I'll hear a rhythmic clicking on the linoleum floor. Click, clack, click. And when I check my pockets, I find them filled with fine red limestone dust, even if I haven't left the city in weeks. The mountain didn't take my life that night, but it took my weight. And sometimes, when I look in the mirror, I feel like I'm becoming a little more translucent, a little more like a shadow. I'm still here, but I'm lighter than I should be. Because I know that somewhere deep in Canyon Diablo, a silver spiral is still turning, and it's only a matter of time before it starts to feel hungry again. And when it does, it knows exactly whose voice to use to call me back. The Watcher in the Rain. I hate the rain in Washington. It's not just the dampness that gets under your skin, but the way it smothers the world. In the deep woods behind my house, a heavy downpour doesn't just make noise. It creates a wall of white static that cuts you off from the rest of civilization. When the storm hits, you aren't just in a house. You're in an island of wood and glass, surrounded by a dark, soaking ocean of pine and cedar. It was 2:14 a.m. when the power flickered for the third time that night. I was in the kitchen, trying to stay awake, pouring a glass of lukewarm water just to have something to do with my hands. The only light came from the small, battery-operated lantern on the counter, casting long, skeletal shadows against the cabinets. I leaned against the sink, looking out through the window. Normally, I can see the tree line, but tonight, the rain was so thick it felt like looking through a frosted lens. Then, the lightning flashed a jagged purple streak that lit up the backyard for a split second. That's when I saw him. About 20 yards out, standing perfectly still in the middle of the deluge, was a man. He wasn't wearing a raincoat. He wasn't even wearing a jacket. He was just standing there, head tilted slightly to the side, staring straight at my kitchen window. My heart didn't just beat. It hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. I froze, my hand still gripping the glass of water. I waited for the next flash of lightning, praying I had just seen a stump or a trick of the shadows. Flash. He was closer, only 15 yards now. He was unnaturally tall, easily 7 feet, with limbs that looked like they had been stretched on a rack. His arms dangled almost down to his knees, his fingers pale and tapering into nothingness. He had no discernible face, just a smooth, wet surface where features should have been, reflecting the dim lantern light from my kitchen. I reached over and flicked off the lantern. I thought that if I couldn't see him, he couldn't see me. I stood there in the absolute pitch black, listening to the rain drumming on the roof. Thump, thump, thump. But then, the sound changed. The rhythmic drumming of the rain was interrupted by a different noise, a wet, heavy sliding sound against the exterior siding of the house. Squelch, drag, squelch. It was moving toward the back door. I fumbled through the dark, my breath coming in ragged gasps, until my fingers found the heavy deadbolt. I slammed it home just as the door handle began to turn. Slowly, methodically. Then, the whispering started. It wasn't a monster's growl. It wasn't a ghost's moan. It was a voice I knew better than my own. It was soft, gentle, and carried that familiar lilt of a bedtime story. It was my mother's voice. She had been buried in the cold ground of Arlington for over 2 years. Yet here she was, on the other side of a thin wooden door in the middle of a Washington storm. Honey, please open the door. It's so cold out here. My clothes are so wet, baby. Just let me in for a minute. I stumbled back, tripping over a kitchen chair, tears hot against my cold face. I pulled my phone from my pocket, the screen's artificial glare blinding me for a second. I didn't call 911. I just turned on the camera, pointing it toward the dark window glass to use the flash as a weapon. As the screen lit up, I didn't see the man outside in the rain. I saw his reflection. He was standing right behind me, his long, wet shadow bleeding into mine on the linoleum floor. The mother voice didn't come from the door anymore. It came from the empty air right next to my ear. I said, "Open the door." The power came back on then, flooding the room with bright yellow light. The kitchen was empty. No man, no shadow. Just me, shivering on the floor, surrounded by the smell of stagnant pond water and old wet earth. I haven't looked out that window since, and every time it rains, I make sure to turn every single light in this house on, because I know he's still out there, waiting for the dark. Waiting for me to forget the rules.
A young woman walking through the dense woods of Pennsylvania on a crisp autumn afternoon. She's alone, her boots crunching softly against the fallen leaves, when she stumbles upon something strange, a rusted metal object half buried in the earth. At first glance, it looks like an old canister or perhaps some forgotten relic of war. But as she kneels to inspect it closer, she realizes its true nature. It's unexploded ordnance, a bomb left over from World War I. And what happens next will leave investigators baffled for years. Hey friends, you're in Dreamcatcher Stories, your cozy corner for stories that got lost along the way. Hit me up in the comments and tell me how this one hits you. Now, let's get sneaky and peek behind the curtain. The story begins in 2021, deep within the rolling hills of northeastern Pennsylvania. This area is known for its serene landscapes, dotted with small towns where everyone knows each other by name. It's a place where life moves slowly, and people take pride in their connection to history, especially the remnants of wars long past. For decades, locals have whispered about hidden dangers lurking beneath the surface, leftover munitions buried during training exercises nearly a century ago. Most dismissed these tales as mere folklore, until one fateful day when reality collided with legend. Lydia was no stranger to the woods. Growing up in this part of the country meant spending countless hours exploring trails and creeks, developing a deep appreciation for the natural world around her. On that particular afternoon, however, Lydia wasn't out for leisure. She had been searching for mushrooms to bring home to her family, venturing farther than usual into areas less frequented by hikers. The forest here felt different, quieter, heavier somehow, as if it carried secrets unwilling to be uncovered. When Lydia spotted the metallic glint peeking out from the soil, curiosity got the better of her. At first, she thought it might be treasure, a piece of history waiting to be rediscovered. Carefully, she brushed away the dirt, revealing more of the object's shape. Its size and weight suggested it wasn't just any artifact. It was far too large and ominous to ignore. Lydia froze, her instincts screaming at her to step back. She had heard enough stories growing up to recognize the potential danger before her. Her heart raced as she pulled out her phone, snapping photos and sending them to local authorities. Within hours, bomb disposal experts arrived on the scene, confirming her worst fears. This was indeed live ammunition, untouched and volatile after all these years. Word spread quickly throughout the community. Neighbors gathered near the edge of the woods, whispering anxiously about how close they'd come to disaster. Bomb squads worked tirelessly to secure the area, cordoning off trails and warning residents to stay clear. As days turned into weeks, additional discoveries emerged. More bombs, grenades, even fragments of shrapnel scattered across miles of woodland. Each find sent shockwaves through the town, forcing everyone to confront the lingering scars of conflict buried not only in the ground but also in their collective memory. Let's rewind to understand how such relics ended up here in the first place. During World War I, parts of rural Pennsylvania were transformed into makeshift military training grounds. Soldiers practiced maneuvers, simulated combat scenarios, and tested weaponry in preparation for deployment overseas. While most explosives were detonated or removed following the war, records suggest that many remained behind, either intentionally buried or simply abandoned due to oversight. Over time, forests reclaimed the land, hiding these deadly remnants beneath layers of soil and vegetation. Generations later, few remembered the full extent of what lay beneath their feet. But why now? Why did Lydia stumble upon this bomb in 2021, nearly a century after it was likely discarded? Some speculated climate change played a role, with shifting weather patterns causing erosion that exposed previously concealed hazards. Others pointed to increased human activity in once remote areas, suggesting that modern development had disturbed the delicate balance keeping these artifacts hidden. Whatever the reason, Lydia's discovery marked the beginning of a broader reckoning, one that would force the town to grapple with both its past and present. As news of the unexploded ordnance spread beyond local borders, national attention followed. Journalists descended upon the town, eager to document the unfolding drama. Among them was Linda Hayes, an investigative reporter renowned for her work uncovering forgotten histories. Linda spent weeks interviewing residents, poring over archival documents, and collaborating with historians to piece together a comprehensive timeline of events. What she uncovered painted a chilling picture. Reports of similar incidents dating back decades, all linked to the same stretch of land. Yet somehow, none had triggered widespread alarm or action until now. Then came the twist. Forensic analysis revealed traces of chemical compounds inside several recovered bombs, indicating they may have been designed for biological warfare. While never deployed during World War I, experimental weapons programs explored such possibilities, leaving behind prototypes that posed catastrophic risks if mishandled. Could these devices still harbor active agents capable of causing harm? Authorities scrambled to assess the situation, enlisting toxicology experts and environmental scientists to evaluate potential threats. Meanwhile, panic gripped the community as rumors swirled about possible contamination affecting water supplies and wildlife. Public fascination with the case grew exponentially thanks to burgeoning true crime podcasts and documentaries. Among them was Time's Echoes of War*, hosted by investigative journalist Mark Thompson. Each episode combined archival footage, expert analysis, and newly uncovered evidence to paint a vivid picture of events surrounding Lydia's discovery. Listeners became armchair detectives, debating theories ranging from government cover-ups to accidental exposure. During one particularly heated discussion forum, a listener named Brian Carter posed a thought-provoking question. What if we're looking at more than just leftover bombs? What if this land holds darker secrets? Fast forward to 2023, and advancements in technology offered new hope. Researchers developed sophisticated imaging techniques capable of detecting underground anomalies without disturbing the soil. Using ground-penetrating radar and drone surveillance, teams mapped extensive networks of buried munitions spanning hundreds of acres. These findings prompted renewed scrutiny of similar cases nationwide, sparking debates about responsibility and accountability. Who should bear the cost of cleanup efforts? How could communities protect themselves from future risks while honoring the sacrifices made by those who trained on these lands? One breakthrough involved analyzing soil samples collected near recovery sites. Results indicated elevated levels of heavy metals and other contaminants, raising concerns about long-term ecological damage. Environmental activists joined forces with local leaders to demand immediate intervention, arguing that failure to act would jeopardize public health and safety. Their campaign gained traction online, drawing support from thousands of individuals passionate about preserving both history and habitat. Social media platforms buzzed with hashtags like #ClearTheLand and #ProtectOurFuture, amplifying calls for systemic change. Meanwhile, personal stories added emotional depth to the narrative. Families shared memories of loved ones who served in World War I, highlighting the sacrifices made by previous generations. Others recounted harrowing encounters with unexploded ordnance, underscoring the ongoing threat posed by these silent killers. One grandmother recalled how her father narrowly escaped injury as a child when he accidentally unearthed a grenade while playing outside. "We've lived with this fear for so long," she said tearfully during a town hall meeting. "It's time someone finally listens." By now, you might think the story ends here, but it doesn't. In recent months, researchers announced they had decoded messages embedded in military correspondence archived during the war era. Using advanced algorithms, analysts identified patterns suggesting deliberate concealment of hazardous materials rather than accidental abandonment. Were officials aware of the dangers posed by these devices? If so, why hadn't they taken steps to mitigate risks sooner? Questions lingered, fueling skepticism and distrust among affected communities. As investigations continued, amateur sleuths joined professional detectives in piecing together fragments of information. Online forums dedicated to discussing leads attracted thousands of members worldwide. Conversations ranged from speculative musings to well-researched arguments supported by data. One member, Amanda Grant, gained prominence when she identified similarities between Lydia's case and other unsolved mysteries involving wartime debris. Her findings prompted authorities to explore connections previously dismissed as coincidental. Are we looking at isolated incidents or part of something larger? Throughout these developments, Emily maintained a complex relationship with her subject matter. On one hand, she felt driven by professional curiosity and moral obligation to uncover truths buried beneath layers of myth and misinformation. On the other hand, she grappled with personal demons triggered by immersing herself so deeply in darkness. How do you study something so monstrous without letting it consume you? She mused during a rare moment of reflection. Her efforts culminated in a comprehensive book published in late 2023, titled Times Beneath the Surface, Unearthing America's Forgotten Wars*. The manuscript combined historical research, contemporary analysis, and first-hand accounts to create the most complete picture of Lydia's journey ever assembled. And there we go. Another memory back from the dark. Don't go too far. I've got more mysteries itching to be told. What do you think happened to Lydia? Let me know in the comments below. Your thoughts matter, and they shape the stories I share next. So go ahead, type it out, and hit send. I'll see you there.